Session 11 on politics.
To bring you an inside look at what's happening at the state capitol this week, we turn to our On Politics panel here on KXAN. Talmadge Heflin is the director of the Center for Fiscal Policy at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. That's a nonprofit research institute whose mission is to promote and defend liberty, personal responsibility, and free enterprise here in Texas. Mr. Heflin served 11 terms in the Texas House from Harris County. Dick Lavine is a senior financial analyst with the Center for Public Policy Priorities, also a nonprofit policy institute here in Austin, committed to improving the economic and social conditions of low and moderate income Texans. Mr. Lavine also worked as a senior researcher at the House Research Organization for the Texas House. And we welcome back our political reporter, Elise Hu, who focuses on multimedia projects for the Texas Tribune. Mr. Talmadge, let me begin with you. Can and should Texas legislators balance the budget by purely cuts?
Absolutely. It will not be an easy task, as I think Senator Ogden said in his speech. It will not be easy. There's a lot of difficulty and where the cuts will have to come from. But as he said, it can be done, and I believe it will be done.
Mr. Lavine, what do you say to that?
I don't think it's possible to balance the budget given our $27 billion shortfall without doing long-term damage to investments in the state of Texas. We must continue to build a more prosperous future for all of us. We look back at 2003 when they had a large budget shortfall. There were cuts. There were very damaging cuts, but that covered only half of the shortfall at that time. They also used all of the rainy day fund that was available. They raised fees. They did various accounting measures, and that's when tuition was deregulated, so that higher education was still being paid for, but was being paid for by students and their families.
So you're for tax increases?
We need to talk about everything, and we need to look at our priorities. How much do we care about the people we're taking care of now who can't take care of themselves? And how much do we care about investing in the future through public education and infrastructure like highways?
Elise?
So this all brings into focus this idea of a $27 billion budget shortfall, which Mr. Heflin will obviously is on the opposite side of. Now, the reason why Mr. Lavine's group and others have estimated that the shortfall is $27 billion is because of state agencies' requests. So education, health and human services, the retirement pensions, those folks have already put in their requests for the next biennium, and based on that, you know, you get this difference between the amount of revenue that Comptroller Combs has estimated that we'll see versus the amount of money that we would have to spend to maintain services. And this is assuming, and you guys can kind of clear this up for me, but this is assuming population growth and certain sort of growth in these entitlements. Is that correct?
Right. And it's our organization that came up with a number that resulted in that $27 billion. And the way we did it is we looked at all the agencies' requests, but only for things that would maintain the current level of services. You can't just look at maintaining the dollar amount. You need to look at how many people are you serving and what does it cost to provide them with those services. And the gap between what it would cost just to keep doing what we're already doing and the amount of money that the controller says we're going to have available is $27 billion.
And it's unrealistic to think that you will fund the requests of the agencies. They're never are funded completely, and what you're looking at is the one-time funding sources that were spent last time, stimulus money, fund balance, some modest growth, and that number, in my opinion, is between $12 and $16 billion. Obviously, that's not funding all the growth. Public ed can hardly ever gets totally funded on all their growth. So we feel like a realistic number on the high side is $16 billion.
So if state agencies end up making cuts, or if there are cuts to education, for example, at the state level, then there are questions about whether local property taxes will then go up. What do you all think about that? You know, local property taxes in order to pay for the gap that the state will no longer pay.
I don't think they have to carry the local property taxes up. I think what needs to happen with the cuts in public education, if they reduce the amount of money going into the formula, what they need to do is reduce some of the regulatory issues, some of the regulation that the state has put on local school districts. And with that, they'll be able to free up money, be able to fund what they need to without raising taxes.
And you know, one of the reasons why we have such a big shortfall is because of what the legislature did in 2006. In response to a state Supreme Court opinion, the legislature required all school districts to cut their property taxes by 1/3. And then the state had to make up the difference so that the schools would still receive the same amount of funding. That's when they changed the franchise tax. It's now called the margins tax. And that's when they raised the cigarette tax by $1 a pack. Unfortunately, that new state revenue was only 1/3 of the revenue that was lost to school districts. So we're having to take money from other things just to keep our schools going because we cut property taxes maybe by more than we could afford.
And there was some talk this week that maybe Texas should think about cutting out the 12th grade. I mean, this is pretty radical stuff.
Well, there'll be a lot of talk about there's got to be some program cuts. And you'll hear a lot of conversation about what can be cut, what can't. And that's just one example of thinking outside the box that the legislators need to do in order to balance the budget. So that's not a surprise. That's been talked about before. And you have so many seniors that are getting dual credit during that last year, even the last 2 years. So that's an item that logically would be on the table.
Another thing, go ahead, Dick.
And to me, that's a perfect example of the kind of cutting back on long-term investments. You might save a little money in the short run, but in the long run, you're going to be worse off if you have people haven't actually received a full high school education.
I want to ask about the Medicaid program that's really ballooned in recent years. For instance, 2/3 of the people in nursing homes in Texas are on Medicaid, and they're hearing about potential cuts to that. Mm-hmm. Very frightening for families to hear that kind of news.
Well, they're limited on what they can cut in Medicaid because taking the stimulus dollars, they got locked in on the eligibility standards. So the only thing that they can cut is some of the ancillary programs and some of it's programs that are non-nursing home programs. They've increased the nursing home reimbursements, and they haven't used the money as they were said that they would to enhance the staff. So cuts can be made there without harming the people in the nursing homes. And the people in nursing homes are not going to be thrown out on the street. They will need to look at our state schools as well. Can we afford to keep all those open? Will we need to close one or two of those? Maybe, but that's something they need to look at.
Dick?
Now, the nursing homes are a good example that the Medicaid program, most of the people who receive Medicaid are actually children, poor children, but the most amount of money in Medicaid goes to nursing homes. So if you're going to cut back on Medicaid to the extent that it's even possible under federal law, that's where it's going to be. What they could do is, for instance, cut the provider rates, how much doctors and nursing homes and hospitals are reimbursed through Medicaid. Well, at some point, those people can choose just not to offer Medicaid. So it may look like we're offering assistance to people, but in fact, if the nursing homes and the doctors and hospitals aren't willing to take it, we're leaving those people on their own.
And all of this will be really interesting to watch in terms of the political debate and the political ramifications because, you know, we expect with the supermajority and all, there's a lot of talk about R versus D in the Texas House. But, you know, what these guys and I were talking about as we were in commercial is that in the House especially, loyalties break down over a lot more different things. For instance, you know, urban versus rural, Dallas versus Houston, all sorts of other lines sort of break in the House. And I think especially on this nursing home funding issue and Medicaid, we'll see a lot of these rural legislators, a lot of them who were elected as part of this freshman, you know, sweep, this Republican wave, you know, have to weigh how much their districts matter versus the, you know, promise to make cuts to the budget.
Got about 30 seconds. Are we going to fix this thing in the session, you think?
Absolutely. I think they can do it in a regular session. No need for a special session. I think they'll get the job done along with redistricting, and we'll be out of here.
Nick?
I'd be more than happy to have a summer vacation, but if it takes a little longer to do this right and to find ways to pay for things that we need, to take care of people who can't take care of themselves, and to make long-term investments in the future, I'll take my vacation in the fall.
And as a journalist, I always root for more sessions, right? Because it's more more fun to watch.
Okay. Thank you all for being here. We've enjoyed
Thank
this
you.
conversation.
My pleasure.